All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the West Southwest Milwaukee School Board to order. Mr. Sickett, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Sarah, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Sickich,
Present.
Ms. Steele,
Here.
Mrs. Lee,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Mr. Becker,
Here.
Mrs. Carr,
Here.
President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda this evening?
There are no modifications.
All right, so tonight we have our Hoover Elementary Student Showcase. The board, we're going to move over to the seats here to allow Hoover to present. Come on up.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Courtney Bang. I'm the proud principal of Hoover Elementary, and I'm gonna have our staff member and our students introduce themselves, and then we'll do a little introduction with the PowerPoint slide. So,
Hello, good evening. My name is Raina Purdue. I am a second grade teacher at Hoover Elementary. My name is
my name is Austin. Awesome. So Owen, Austin, Edwin are in Miss Purdue's second grade class. So we wanted to kick off this evening with a little bit about our theory of action. So sure as the board, a little bit about our theories of actions in the different schools, but I wanted to highlight two things that we've been focused on at the start of this school year at Hoover. The first one is ensuring that high quality, explicit grade level instruction is happening in all of our classrooms. So you're going to hear a little bit about Miss Purdue's second grade class tonight, and one of the projects they've been working on in their social studies classroom, and the second grade standard that it's focused on, and what the students have been doing to learn a little bit about the material. The other one is we've been focusing a lot on providing coaching and feedback. This was a big area that staff across Hoover shared that they wanted to see more of throughout the building. So I've had the pleasure of being in Miss Purdue's classroom several times throughout this school year to observe and offer feedback to her as an instructional leader. This last week, she was actually a part of our district math instructional round. So she got observed by our HMH coordinator and our elementary, oh gosh, I don't know his exact title, but Keith was in there. And also other principals and DLCs from the district came, and we all got to watch Miss Purdue's classroom and these lovely gentlemen and give her some feedback as well. So she's been receiving a lot of feedback and coaching throughout the year. So excited that we've been able to already hit on a couple of these points of our theory of action. And so that's why we asked Miss Purdue if she would come speak here tonight and talk a little bit about one of the things that's happening in her classroom so far this year, and then give our students a chance to answer some questions and share a little bit about what they've been learning in their social studies project. So go to the next slide. All right, I'm going to pass over to Miss Purdue.
perfect. All right, so every day I teach in front of 21 second graders. So I'm a little nervous. If y'all know why. My name is Raina Purdue. Second grade teacher at Hoover. I am following our I can statement. If you can look over at the TV, it says I can demonstrate understanding of cause and effect and consideration of civics using reliable resources and reasoning. Now, that's a lot, right? So our focus is to compare basic political institutions. So what a government is and how it differs in a city, state, tribal, and country. Right now, I am focusing on our United States government. So to start off our civics unit, we focus on how many states do we have? We have 50 states. We talked about the, I'm getting comfortable now. The American flag and what's represented our country, the stars on our flags, the stripes on our flags, the Pledge of Allegiance that we said this morning, we focused on that. So after I did that, we talked about laws and rules, and we talked about the rules that we have at home. That was very easy for my students to talk about because, there's some rules like clean up after yourself, go to bed at a certain time, things like that. So once I got students more comfortable, okay, what is rules, what are laws? I see this at home, but you also see this in your everyday living. And so that's how it's tied to government of our 3 branches of government. So we've been talking about that for the past 2 weeks. Students work if they can show their love report. The 3 branches of government. I'm also a Hoover GT leader, so I focus on depth and complexity. And these are like the rules. There's a rule icon, and so I connect the rules to the 3 branches of government. And then students also gave details when they did research using their graphic organizer. And then we also use like brainstorm videos, YouTube videos to talk more about the 3 branches of government. So students took notes on the 3, I don't even need this. Students took notes on the 3 branches of government. And then they took the notes that they had and they wrote their notes down for each part of our 3 branches. And they all did this on their own. They colored it. My expectation was I wanted it to look like a fall tree. I don't want to see like blue, purple, things like that. That was my only expectation. So I really let my second graders really be creative and tie in what we know in our home into like our full government. So our next step that we will do is focus on how our city and state government works. So now we know how our country government works. We'll now focus on our state and city. All right.
So, before we open it up to you, you're not off the hook yet. All right. Before we open up to you guys with some questions, I told the students we were practicing a little bit today and I asked them these questions. I kid you not, I did not give them these. They already knew all of this from class. So what I'm asking them now, they knew when they came to my office and I was like, all right, practice done after like 5 minutes, like you're coming tonight. So I'm gonna ask you some questions about our branches of government and then I'll open it up to you guys as the board to also ask some questions that you have. But so first off, I want to see, raise your hand if you can tell me, what are the 3 branches of our government? All right, Owen, loud and proud.
Executive, legislative, and judicial.
Awesome job. All right, now my next question is, I want to know who is the person that runs the executive branch? Edwin.
The president.
The president. All right, who runs or who's a part of the legislative branch?
Congress.
Congress. All right, what about, oh, and you had your hand up. Can you answer this one? Who is a part of the judicial branch?
The Supreme Court.
Supreme Court, awesome. All right, who can tell me what's something that the executive branch does? Owen.
Enforce law.
They enforce the laws. What's something that the judicial branch does? Austin. Judicial branch.
The laws.
Fair.
And make sure the laws are fair. Exactly. All right, Edwin, let me see if you got this one. What does the legislative branch do? The one thing that they do, they make the laws. Exactly. Awesome job. All right. So. So now I'd love to open it up to you guys as the board to ask any questions you have of myself, Miss Purdue, or our 3 boys here.
Is there any branch that you want to learn more about now?
The one branch I don't really, the one that I want to learn about more would be the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Very good.
Yeah.
If you could pick one of the branches to be a part of yourself, what one would you want to be part of?
The
Is there anything that you learned about the branches that you found to be surprising?
What I saw that was surprising that in the judicial branch they make sure laws were fair instead of like something else.
Evan, did you want to say anything?
A lot of people.
Right.
Ms. Purdue? So, wonderful job, building background knowledge and applying it to their real world. Where would you take this next as a teacher? How would you, if you were going to continue this now with the facts and the knowledge that they have? If you could, not necessarily if you're going to, what would you do with this information?
Yeah, so we found that like, okay, the president, but who's our president right now? So put in those people that are in those branches, put the name to them. So who are our judges right now? Who's the president right now? What is more about a Congress? Who sits in a Congress? Yeah, so I would have taken like put a name to those people. Yeah, okay, that would be my next step.
I will name too that Miss Purdue and her other counterpart in second grade have done some work too to bring in speakers for each of these as well. She didn't talk about that herself, but they've brought in different representatives of government organizations and entities to speak. So I know that's something else that we didn't highlight here, but they've also done.
All right. Great job.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks you guys so much.
Great job.
Thanks so much.
Good job, Evan. Good job, Austin.
Really nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Hoover staff and families and students for coming here to present to us today. It's always great to see what's going on in our schools on a classroom level like this and hear from some of the students about what they're learning. So thank you for taking the time and effort to do that. I know this does not happen easily, especially when you're talking about second graders. So thank you so much for that. So with that, we'll move on with our agenda this evening to the superintendent's report.
All right, good evening, good evening. I want to start out by recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day on today, October 14, 2024. We definitely want to recognize the 12 tribal nations that are inside of the state of Wisconsin and their contribution to our culture as well as our history. So again, Indigenous Peoples Day. Legislative updates. The Wisconsin Department of Instruction has released standardized assessment results showing that about half our students in both public and private school choice programs are proficient in English language arts and mathematics for the 23-24 school year. The results are part of the Wisconsin Student Assessment System, which provides information about students' knowledge in core academic areas and helps schools and districts understand where additional supports may be needed. Just a heads up to the community, on November 19th, the official scores will be made public from last year's forward exams. So stay tuned for those updates. And again, November 19th is when those scores will be made public. DPI hosts White House Cybersecurity Director for Roundtable on K-12 Cybersecurity. DPI hosted a roundtable on cybersecurity at Sun Prairie Public Library, where education, public library, and cybersecurity leaders discuss the importance of proactive protection for school district infrastructure. Our district recognitions. I want to personally and on behalf of the entire district recognize our school board. So this is last week was actually School Board Appreciation Week, but because we did not meet, we want to make sure that we recognize all of our school board members. Mr. Joe Becker, Mr. Brandon Burns, Mrs. Jane Carr, Mrs. Amy Deal, Mr. Brian Keller, Mrs. Kristen Kaiser, Mrs. Rebecca Lee, Mr. Noah Lee, and Mr. Jeff Sigich. Thank you to our very own WAWM School Board for their hard work and unwavering commitment to our students, staff, and community. Their guidance and leadership helps ensure every student has the opportunity to succeed. And you guys should have had a special gift for you. And my hope is that we can wear them next meeting and all take a good picture together. Okay, so we can put it on the website. I appreciate you guys. Our educators of the month, we want to congratulate Mr. Bob Graff, who is an art teacher at WAC, and Lisa Dresky. She's the head secretary at Wilson, for being the educators of the month for September. We kind of switched some things up, so we'll recognize all of them in the month of December at the board meeting. But as we accumulate the awardees, we'll have all of them recognized at that particular time. But I did want to make sure that I recognize our recipients from the month of September. You just never know how coming to a classroom can pick up someone. Or Mr. Graff gave me a big bear hug. He said I was having a tough one. This made up. So you just never know. So I really appreciate him. Congratulations to Docky and Hale Senior, Saya Freeberg, for a very busy summer of powerful life and learning experiences. Mrs. Freeberg, summer included attending a flight academy where she was able to pre-solo in addition to getting 10 hours of flight time toward her pilot's license. She staffed the Aviation Manufacturer and Maintenance Academy in Kansas City. Volunteered at EAA Air Venture in Oshkosh with her squadron, helping to track incoming planes, and finally attended the Aeronautics and Aviation Business Academy that focused on air patrol in New York City. At this academy, Saya was praised for delivering the most organized, comprehensive, and engaging presentation in the entire academy. Attendees were asked to select a product of our service related to aviation aeronautics, select a target user of the product service, create a list of potential issues, brainstorm possible solutions, sketch out their improved, redesigned product service, explain how their version addresses the issues, and if possible, gather feedback. After receiving her positive feedback from the academy, Saya told them all about Docky PBL High School and how the way students learn there and solve real-world authentic problems, prepared for her perfectly for the presentation. Way to go, Saya.
Yep. That's amazing.
Our retirement breakfast, we held and hosted a little bit over 150 of our district retirees on October 9th. So I want to say thank you to the organizing committee. It was definitely a thrill and pleasure to host such a worthy crowd. I did include in this slideshow a picture of Dr. Harold Sloan and Dr. Marty Lexman, who both have served as former superintendents in our district. And so I definitely want to thank them for coming out. And if you're looking at what I have on my boutonniere, I want to send a special shout out to Miss Carol Graham for designing the boutonniere and insisting that I wear it. And so I definitely was grateful for that. Thank you, Shelley, for bringing that to my attention and for bringing that boutonniere to the event. So thank you for that. Several community visits and meetings. Quadrant B Superintendent's meeting, West Allis Rotary Club meeting. We had instructional rounds at West Milwaukee, Frank Lloyd Wright, Central, and Docky. CISA #1 monthly superintendent's meeting. Referendum engagement sessions were held on September 26th and October 8th. Nathan Hale homecoming parade and football game. Elementary and secondary district-wide data meetings. One-on-one meetings with board members, West Allis Women's Club meeting, Student Advisory Committee, voice, district-wide PTA council meeting. Our retirees breakfast that I already mentioned. We had cross-functional team meetings. Mitchell Elementary School scavenger hunt. Meeting with CASA Aid USA regarding a potential partnership. Walker Elementary School PTA Halloween party, and Nathan Hale and Central football games. Marquette, and I just learned I missed the ending Friday with a win over Wauwatosa West. So that's what happens when you leave just a tad bit early sometimes. You missed a great ending. So congratulations to our young man for that victory. Want to remind the community that Central High School will be having their homecoming festivities throughout this week. In particular, they have a football game on October 15th and 18th, semifinals and finals. Homecoming parade on October 18th. And October 19th is the homecoming dance. The football game will actually be on the 18th. I did want to highlight several data points for interest for the board as well as the community. So we do have our early college credit program, our updated numbers. So the number of students from Hale are 2, WAC 3, DOCI 2 for early college program, which is a total of 7. The number of courses as a collective are 19. And so for those who are unfamiliar with early college programs, those are 4 years school programs, higher level courses that are not currently offered by our district. So those students are going out and taking those particular courses. And then we have our Start College Now update. So we do have a total of 24 students and 33 courses for the Start College, and those are specifically tech programs that are being offered, that are not offered by our district, but these students are taking advantage of this opportunity. So as a collective, we currently have 13 students in the fall enrolled in early college credit program and 7 for the spring. As you can see, that is a increase from last year. And then our Start College numbers, we are for fall 19, and for the spring we're at 24. Wow. So we're steady increasing. I think when we look at why, because I asked the question, why do you think we're increasing? I think we're doing a better job of informing students of the opportunities and working with our counselors consistently to make sure that they're pushing kids into the right programs that are going to make them successful. Almost done. Did want to do an attendance comparison. So this time last year, we were at 93.5 year to date, and currently we're at 94.4. So our attendance is up compared to last year. We want to make sure that we are continuing the upward trajectory. And I'm weekly looking at these reports, sending them out to principals, having conversations. We have attendance teams that are meeting consistently with our schools, and not just secondary, but also elementary as well, and trying to formulate plans to constantly create opportunities for our students to be at school. Our informal and formal complaints, and so this is being tracked. So currently we only have 5 compared to 31 at this point last year. I don't think we're doing that much better. I just think that we're more responsive, if that makes sense. So before things elevate to a certain level from parents, we have things in place that are really addressing situations from parents. What we're still trying to make sure is that we address all complaints, and so there's a lot of room to grow for as we seek to iron out all of our problems, in a situation that may occur. But we are definitely trying to be more proactive versus reactive. And the voice. So about 2 weeks ago, I met with our voice members for the 24-25 school year. And as a reminder, the voice is our student advisory group. And we will meet once a month, and we will talk about certain issues that are affecting students and especially dealing with policy and any effects that policy have on students and how they are successful in school. And so I want to announce tonight our voice members. From Central High School. We have Urban Edwards, Toby Jesse, and Devin Williams. From DOCI, we have Ariana Reyes, Shaylin Smith, and Nate Smith. And from Nathan Hale, we have Alina May, John Gruchich, and Brody Kaminsky. And tonight, we have the world premiere of our voice member who sits on our board as an advisory member to the board. So Mr. John Gruchich, I want to introduce John, and I'll allow him to give us any updates he may have from Nathan Hale. Is that okay?
Yeah, so I like the
Let me
superintendent.
introduce you first, though, John. John is a senior at Nathan Hale. He's a member of the cross country and track team. He's also a member of the National Honor Society and Rotary. He's a member of the core team for Renaissance Student Leadership Team, and he's enrolled in multiple AP classes. Most importantly, he is the son of Sam Gruchich. who owns Ready Quick Cleaners right on Greenfield. My lord. So, he comes from a great family, great kid, John. We're glad to have you. We're just gonna allow you to formally introduce yourself right now.
All right, I think you hit most of it right on the dot. My name is John Gruchich. I'm a senior at Nathan Hale. I'm 18 years old, and I cannot explain how proud and happy I am to be here right now. To thanks to not only you guys, but Dr. Robinson yourself. Nathan Hale, right now, it's a beautiful time to be a Husky. Homecoming finished up at the end of September. It was a massive success. It was held at the rec center this year, which was very fun. Allowed for some really fun memories and a time to be had. Along with that, recently we just had all 9th, 10th, and 11th graders had the first ACT practice of the year so far. While they did that, our seniors, including me, we went through college assemblies talking about scholarships and other possible scholarship options after high school, which is a very informative and very, very well done assembly, which was, I believe, was the first time it was held, and we hope to see it again next year. And not only that, fall sports are coming to an end. As you said before, football team had a massive success Friday night. That was an incredible win, pulling her off right at the end. But other than that, that's about all I have.
How's cross country doing?
Cross country's doing great. Ready to go to state in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
John, you've set the bar high. Outstanding job.
The only thing is, you forgot to mention the pep rallies that are held at Hale. That's the only thing.
You want to talk about that? You have the floor. Go ahead. Tell me.
I mean, I think you did a great job describing what I stand for at the board, not only trying to represent students here, but also trying to represent students at my school through the use of pep rallies, whether that be at a dance like homecoming, or sometimes, as you said before, I'm on a core team called Renaissance at Nathan Hale High School. And basically what that's working towards is trying to improve culture and climate. We try to meet at least once a month, the core team as much as possible, trying to do anything we can, whether that be incentives, trying to boost attendance, anything like that. And as part of that, sometimes we'll have pep rallies to which I get the host and try to get students involved and boost up our culture and climate as much as we can.
He's the hype man. So thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
And I just wanted to remind the public of our upcoming referendum sessions. We have October 19th will be at Nathan Hale. That is a Saturday from 10 to 11. And then October 24th, we'll have our final one at Frank Lloyd Wright from 6 to 7 p.m. We urge all of our community to come out. These referendum sessions are slightly different. They include tours of the buildings. And so we think it's important not only to talk about the needs, but for you to see it up close and personal. So we look forward to engaging the community in our final 2 sessions. All right, that concludes my report for tonight.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to item 8, public comments for this evening. We do have one person sign up for public comments. For those who might be in chat, should be a link for signing up if you'd like to address the board. As a reminder, when you're doing public comments, please start by stating your name and your address. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. It will not be back and forth conversation. If there's a simple question that can be answered at that time, we will. Otherwise, any formal response that is required will be done by the next regular Board of Education meeting. So with that said, I would like to call up Mr. John Mulling.
Hi, my name is John Mulling. I live 3850 South Pole. Tonight I want to talk about salaries. There are 2 pay systems in America. It's private sector and public sector. And I personally believe the school system is tangentially broken away from the public sector and gone ballistic. Anybody got to guess how much Governor Tony Evers makes? He makes $153,000 a year. Anybody know what Mayor Dan Devine makes? He makes $80,400 as of this year. A starting police officer in West Dallas makes $57,513. He or she kisses his spouse goodbye in the morning and doesn't know if he's going to be able to return in the evening. He gets $57,513. School salaries. We have a superintendent who makes $210,000. We have an assistant school superintendent that makes $172,000. The superintendent of this school district makes $57,000 more than the governor of the state, the entire state. How did we ever get to this point? It's taken a long time. How can we have such a discrepancy? I want to talk teacher salaries. As of August 2024, teacher salaries range from $55,000 to $81,000. The median salary is $67,000. The one thing that has never been discussed that I've ever heard Basically, teachers work 9 months and I'm gonna hear boos and stuff thrown at me. However, you know, teacher's gonna say, I spent a week before Labor Day getting my classroom ready, books and everything. Yes, but you get an Easter vacation of a week. I spent 2 weeks in June, you know, finishing off my year. Yeah, but you get 2 weeks for Christmas vacation, approximately. We're talking 9 months. I'm really good at statistics and math. I mean, a comparison. $67,000, which is the median salary, is to 9 months, like X is to 12. Anybody want to know what, if that salary was continued for 1 year, what that comes to? That comes to $89,333 if it's figured on a yearly basis. That's a hell of a good salary. I'm not through yet because we got to talk benefits. Benefits that I've gotten from NOAA, 22.6% from West Dallas, 14.5% mandated by the state of Wisconsin, comes to 37.1% benefits. When you add that to the salary, or when you figure that out, that comes to $24,857 for benefits. You guys are asking for a 6% raise with the referendum. A 6% raise on $67,000 is an extra $4,020. When we come down to the bottom line for the median teacher in West Dallas, we have $67,000 salary, $24,857 benefits, $4,020 for a total of $95,877.
Thank you, Mr. Molly.
What?
Your 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
The 3 minute. Well, okay, last one was, this is on a prorated basis for the year. It would be $118,000.
Thank you, Mr. Molly.
If you're prorating what you're paying the teachers at the present time. Thank you.
That's what really matters. Seeing no one else signed up for public comments, I will close them at this time. And we'll move on to our board reports this evening, starting with 9.1, a review of our board calendar. So today we have a Board of Education meeting that started at 6, and then we have a fall screener data presentation on Monday, October 21st. The workshop that was scheduled was canceled, so enjoy your Monday off, everyone. And then on Monday, October 28th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting where we will approve our final budget and tax levy. And then we also have a workshop on DLBA. Moving to 9.2, our board committee reports, starting with 9.2.1, college and career readiness. Ms. Kaiser.
Thank you. Our committee met tonight. We didn't have any old business or any change to the agenda, but we did have a new agenda item or a new business. I just recently got back from the National Indian Education Association, so Native American educators across the nation conference. And a question I posed to our committee was, what are we doing with teachers to bring culture into our classrooms? So like teaching culturally versus teaching culture. And what are ways we can build capacity around culture and embed it into our curriculum? And so some ideas that were discussed was there is a culturally relevant practices framework developed by our equity team that is out there. Cultural events within the school, sharing resources, student services and responsiveness, curriculum adoption process, looking for cultural relevance. To appropriate, that's an Indigenous Peoples Day that I'm bringing this up as well, because, you know, I work with Native American population. But it was just a nice discussion about what we already have and what else could we add to the district to make sure we are being culturally relevant and bringing in other practices to support all of our learners. And that's my report.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions regarding Ms. Kaiser's report? Or any suggestions for future agenda items for the committee? See none. Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser. Move on to communications and community relations, Ms. Steele.
All right, our committee met on September 23rd. And we had one item of new business. We just talked about the referendum and got an update. So the first canvassing event for the referendum had took place on Saturday, September 14th. Canvassers were organized by elementary school, with around 8% of community members opening their doors for canvassers. The district recognizes that more people are needed for future canvassing event or dates, so efforts are being made to get more volunteers. A one-pager of canvassing do's and don'ts was created, and the canvassers are going to be provided with more door hangers at future events. Referendum engagement sessions will take place starting on Thursday, September 26th. These sessions will include 10 to 15-minute presentation on the referendum questions, and then community members will be taken on building tours. There will also be a gallery of photos displayed that shows the areas of our schools that need repairs. And then the last of the referendum videos are currently in the process of being recorded and edited. These videos will include the overview of the ballot language and then our responses to the referendum outcome to be released on November 6th. So, and that's all we discussed.
All right, any questions for Ms. Deal regarding her report? Or any items to be considered at future agendas? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Steele. Move on to 9.3, board member reports on community events. Any events board members attended they'd like to report on? Ms. Carr?
I was actually busy. I did the Hale Homecoming Parade. I don't know if we had, have we met since then? The Hale Homecoming Parade. I did it 3 referendum sessions, engagement sessions, and one of them was through the Women's Club, which I helped orchestrate, and we had such a great response to that. I was so glad that we got that opportunity. I visited, I think the thing that really was fun for me was I visited a 2nd grade classroom at Walker Elementary. And I really just went in because I wanted to welcome a new teacher who was coming, who came back to our district after many, many years, and had such a delightful time with her. I brought them a huge, like 3-foot stuffed penguin. And I said, you know, like, I found him on my doorstep, and your job is to name him. And so we went through this whole process. I told the kids, you know, he doesn't like fish. He doesn't like to have his feet touched. I gave him all this information, blah, 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 all the things he does like. And they had to name him. And the name ended up being Cutie Ron Walker. That was the name that the 2nd graders came up with. They read to him. He sits in the reading corner, and they write to him daily. And so it was such a wonderful opportunity. And I know that a lot of the board members work during the day, but if you ever do get that chance, it just makes what we do so worthwhile.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carr. Mr. Sikich, I saw your hand raised before.
I don't know if this ties in, but I'm tying it in anyway.
All right.
I just want to thank anybody and everybody that had anything to do with the breakfast.
Yeah.
As a retired teacher, to see all those other retired teachers was just tremendous. And to run into Dr. Sloan, I almost passed out. I haven't seen him, and this is his 25th year of retirement.
Wow.
He's 86 years old. I should say young because he still plays pickleball. But anyway, it was great.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Sikich. Any of the board members want to report events they attended? All right. Well, I know that I attended the canvassing events that we've had so far. Was able to attend the breakfast. It was great to see so many people. The joy you see in people's faces when they recognize someone they haven't seen in so long. To be able to sit and talk with them was great. And I'm sure I'm missing something else that I attended. But that's enough. So we have more events coming up. So I'm just going to roll it into 9.4. As Dr. Robinson mentioned, we have our referendum engagement sessions. We have one coming up this coming Saturday, and then another one the following week. And we're not going to have a meeting before that next one. So I just want to encourage people, if you are interested in learning, if you're confused about what the referendum's about, what things going to be what it's going to be used for, this is an opportunity to get that information and have it answered from the experts in our district about why and what and how. And so please do come to those, then you will get an opportunity at each one of those buildings to see some of the things that we're looking at updating if the capital question is approved. And then, yeah, I think that's it. So I'll move on to item 10, consent agenda this evening, starting with 10.1, approval of our minutes from our last regular Board of Education meeting on September 23rd. 10.2 are employment summary, and 10.3 are sub-learning contracts. Does anyone need anything separated out?
So move.
Second.
All right, motion in a second. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. And move on to our action item this evening, 11.1 Neola policy updates. Dr. Robinson.
So we do have several updates and changes to policies. We go through this process around every 3 or 4 months following the legislation session. And we met in August with Dr. Zeman from Neola. And so we do have several updates that we've sent onto the board. The majority are what I would say cosmetic, and meaning that maybe a couple of words have changed in them. But others are just merely updates to align with Wisconsin statute and the changes that have been updated within it.
All right, so we've been given this a while ago in the notes from Dr. Robinson. So did any board members have any questions or concerns regarding those policy updates? No. And John, do you want to give you an opportunity? So this is an indication. One of the instances where these policies obviously affect, in some instances, what happens in our schools, which would affect students. I don't know if you had any opportunity to look at this policy updates at all. If you had any questions or comments that you wanted to put forward.
I did actually. Thank you for introducing me.
No, go ahead.
There's one I want to touch on, academic honesty. And this is talking about AI, and this is talking about AI and its use in the classroom and how it should be limited and or allowed. And I really enjoyed this piece because, as we all know, this is a new growing technology. This didn't exist 10 years ago. All of a sudden, this is something that's being thrust upon teachers and students, and we're now having to deal and learn with. And so I absolutely loved the stance on this. I believe while advancement in AI and NLP technology offers new and unique solutions to organization and analysis, it shouldn't take away or substitute any original student thoughts and or work, but rather be an extension of students' work when specifically allowed. So I really like this piece and how it was manageable in classroom if under direct supervision.
Great, good. Thank you for that. Appreciate your input on it. And as we move forward this process, it happens 4 times a year? 3 times a year. So I don't know how much was described to you, but like we work with a company that basically helps ensure that our policies are being kept up to date based on either new laws that are happening or new things like AI that are occurring, to ensure that we're in compliance, and also that we have a stance in these sorts of things, so that there isn't gray. We try to remove gray area as much as we can. So there's good hard and fast rules for that. So I appreciate your input on that, and please share everything with the rest of the voice so that they understand that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So if no other questions from the board, I would look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much. Move right into our workshop this evening on the fall screener data. And I will, I guess, pause a moment to allow Ms. Sack and Ms. Braj to come up and give us a presentation about what we have. So I guess Dr. Robinson is going to start us off once everyone is resituated.
While we're setting up, I want to would be remiss if I did not thank Ms. Courtney Vang and Amanda Henderson for the work they're doing at Hoover. Thank you for hanging around tonight. It would be good to see individuals in the audience. Thank you for having your kids prepped and teachers. So thank you for being here. So I wanted to start off the presentation today to kind of bring us into this mode, because the next couple of meetings, mainly through November, we're going to be looking at a lot of data. Okay. And one of the things that I'm always reminded are people like Dr. Richard DeFore, who is the father of PLC work. He said, to assess our effectiveness in helping all students learn, we must focus on results, evidence of learning, evidence of student learning and use results to inform and improve our professional practice and respond to students who need intervention or enrichment. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the work that we're going to talk about tonight with that particular quote. And then I had this little graphic that I put together. So when you look at our district, I think that a year ago this time, I would say we were data deficient. This is what I mean by data deficient. We had data's there, but I don't think we were using it in the right way. I don't think we were using it to change practice and the things that we're doing. So that's when I say we were a bit of a data deficient district. But now we're at the point where I believe we're data rich because we have the data, we're learning how to use it, but that can't be the end of it. We have to now become data efficient. In other words, now we have all of this data. We know what it means. Now, how do we put different practices in place to improve that data? And also look at our individual population, and look at it from an individual standpoint and say, okay, well, what's going to work for this kid? What's going to work for this kid? And that's where we are as a district right now. We're really moving to being data efficient. And so I just wanted to kind of start with that. I kind of told that little example to our principals on last week. And I want to be clear that I really believe that the direction we're going in, adding the dashboard through Wise-Local, there's a consistent model of looking at and analyzing data, not only at the district level, which you guys are doing now, but also at the school level. That's becoming consistent practice. And that's exactly what's going to move the needle when it comes to our student data. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Barrage and Corey to lead us through.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I just want to tie back to our district theory of action. And as you notice, I have a big arrow pointing to this aspect of our theory of action, which is increasing data literacy through a consistent cycle of data analysis and professional development. So this is something we set in front of our school leadership teams. And then it's beautiful because they've all kind of incorporated this and modeled a lot of their theory of actions off of this as well. So our focus area is then being focused on by our leaders within buildings. And then, of course, then we're working with teachers so that they feel confident and competent in what they're being asked to do. So a lot of that is coming through professional learning and coaching. And of course, the hope is exactly what, or the goal is exactly what Dr. Robinson has outlined, which is that all of us at all levels really deeply understand the data. We can use the data to inform our decision-making strategically. And a lot of that work has been done with our leadership and learning team in collaboration with Dr. Robinson, as well as led by our manager of research data accountability, which is Ms. Corey Sack. So she is going to show and kind of highlight some things from our fall screener data. We're going to get a little bit deep into it. So just know that it's really about building everyone's capacity to be able to talk the same language and have some shared language. And then I'm hopeful that through that, we can have a nice discussion at the end of any questions you have. Next steps, what we've taken from this new, what would I say, our most recent data set. So
Thank you. I think that was a really nice introduction. So one of the things that I've been working really hard to do with our leadership team, both our district leadership team and then our actual coaches and principals, is to really go beyond just we have kids that have these scores, but really trying to understand what those scores mean. And so that meant before really presenting the data to you guys, making sure that you really have a good understanding of what FastBridge data is, because that's what I'm sharing tonight, and what that means so that we can understand where we go next. So really to understand it, the first thing is we use FastBridge as our universal screener. To understand what a screener does is it's a really broad assessment. We use A reading and A math, which are broad overall assessments. It's like when you go to the doctor and when you first get in, they take your blood pressure, they take your temperature, they weigh you. And then they have a really basic, broad understanding of where you are before you ever actually have a discussion. So it gives the doctor some information of where to start the conversation. It's the same thing with these screeners.
A reading and A math are really broad assessments that give the teachers a starting point. It is not the end all be all of anything, but it gives us a data point to inform where we are. There are three main types of assessment that we have: formative, interim, and summative. This is a formative assessment. It's broad. It's supposed to just give a starting point of where students may or may not have lagging skills or gaps in their understanding of skills. And the teachers use that to inform their planning moving forward. So FastBridge gives us that. One thing I do want to clarify, because the state did this lovely thing with Act 20 and mandated that we use Ames Web Plus. While Ames Web Plus is a screener, it is specifically a screener for reading early literacy phonics skills. So what it's really targeting is our kindergarten through third grade students and their phonics skills. So it's not quite as broad as A reading, but what it does is it still just gives like kind of a starting point so that we can use diagnostic assessments and what we know about our students to move them in the right direction.
We just wanted to clarify that because the state was considering using FastBridge as that, but they chose not to. So Ames Web Pearson is what the state approved assessment is, but we're not going to focus on early literacy tonight data. We're going to focus on FastBridge.
So there's a couple key terms to just kind of hone in on, and I'm going to get into them a little bit in depth, but really what FastBridge is an adaptive assessment. And the types of data that it's going to give us that I'm going to get into in a couple of slides here is benchmarks and percentiles or norms. So let's talk about the fact that it's a computer adaptive assessment. I'm moving here and not up here. So what a computer adaptive assessment does is it starts with questions that are testing a bunch of skills. If a student has never tested with us before in West Dallas using FastBridge, it starts them at grade level content. So items that test grade level benchmark skills and standards. If a student has tested with us, so say our first graders in school tested with us in kindergarten last year, what the test does is it starts with questions that are at the level that they tested at the last time. So then what the test does, because it is adaptive, is as the student gets things correct, it actually has questions get harder. And as they get some of those wrong, it brings it down and the questions get easier. And it does that, and as the illustration shows, it narrows it down until they're getting about half the things right and half the things wrong. Because what that's doing is identifying where that student's instructional level is. Where are the skills that they've kind of got it, but they still have work to do. And that's what the test does, is the skill that it's giving us is where a student is really kind of getting half of it right and half of it wrong. That's why that's that starting point for that teacher to start digging in and figure out what to do next with that student. The next piece, oopsie, I went too far, is a scale score. What FastBridge does is it takes, there's scores coming from all these different types of items on their assessment, right? And what it does is in those different areas, it creates a scale that has equal distance between different scores so that it's a whole lot easier to add those things up and compare them for a student. So when we talk scale scores, which we're going to talk about here in a second as we get into benchmarks, is just that number on the scale of how they tested. When we start looking at what the data is telling us, there are three main types of data that it gives us. I mean, it gives us a ton of other things because FastBridge is a product that provides other assessments and interventions and lesson plans that are possible and optional for our teachers to use. But really, the first thing we're doing is just making sure we understand the data we have. So the first piece is benchmarks. Benchmarks are basically where FastBridge has done all of their research and says that a first grader in fall should have this scale score. Then what FastBridge does is based on how far or close they are to that score, it says that they're either really low or really far from meeting that goal and they're high risk. So they're at high risk of not having academic success as they move on through school. Or they're behind, but not quite as behind. And there's some risk. There's some risk of these students having problems with their academic success. Again, it's a broad screener that tells the teacher we might have some things to dig into and really target instruction. Then if they're low risk, they're either at that benchmark or just approaching it or just over it. That says they're in low risk of having any real difficulties. So that's where you're starting is at grade level. And then they have what they call college pathway, students that are high above that grade level benchmark. So that's what benchmarks give us. Traditionally speaking, our district, principals, leadership, coaches, teachers wrote their SLOs, wrote their SIPs based on moving a certain percentage of students into low risk. We know that we have a good 48% of our students in low risk and college pathway. So by the end of the year, we want 80% to be in low risk and college pathway. And that's how we used to write our goals. We made this shift and we're going to talk about that shift in just a second. The second piece of data is percentiles, which basically says we're not looking at what that grade level benchmark is. What we're doing is taking the students that have tested and we're comparing their scores to the other students in that grade level. So what we do is they create a bell curve. They take all the students in a particular grade level and where most of that group tested, that's what they consider to be that 30 to 85th percentile. So that's where most students score. Then there are scores that are going to be above that. That's that 85th percentile or above, or those students that fall below or far below those percentiles when compared to their same age peers. The reason we do use this piece of data is because if all of our students are far below, all of them, right? We know where to really target to start, highlighting or really focusing our targeted instruction. If all of our students were above the grade level benchmark, we know that those lower students have that extra room to grow to get up to where everybody else is. It gives us a starting point when we look at how our students altogether are functioning as a cohort. So where we really see this is, I know Dr. Grease came and spoke to the board this summer about the early literacy plan and the students below the 29th percentile, because we know those are the students we want to target. Those are the students we're identifying because it doesn't matter where the group is. We know those are the students that need to catch up to their peers. And then as a district, it's our job to make sure they're all at that benchmark. So the third piece of data that we are looking at, which is a new piece for many of us, is a growth percentile. And basically they calculate that in a similar way. They take a student's test score in one test. So in this case, it's their fall test score. And then in winter, so they compare fall to winter or fall to spring, and they take the amount of growth a student made. So the difference in those two scores. So if a student comes in the fall and scores, I'm just to use a round number, scores 200. And in the fall or in the winter, they score a 215, they moved 15 points on that scale. If another student in that same grade level starts at a 75 and gets to a 90, they also moved 15 points. Now, if most of the kids in that particular cohort nationally make 15 points between fall and winter, that's what they're going to consider typical growth or 1 year's growth. We're using the terminology from FastBridge because it makes it easier when we run reports. So what it does is it makes that same bell curve, and where most of the kids, that distance they move from one test to the other score, that's their growth percentile. And then they put it on the bell curve, and if you're way above, you've made aggressive growth. If you're above that 75th percentile, you're making typical if you're between the 40th and 75th. And then modest or flat would be below that. And we don't want to do that because anytime you're making modest or flat growth using this assessment, it means you're making less than 1 year's progress or less than what the typical growth is for students in that grade level. And we don't want that. Did you have a question?
Do you want us to hold questions until the end? Because you
If we could hold, for a little bit longer, and then we can do questions before we get into the data from this year.
Okay, then I gotta write it down.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you.
So again, to kind of illustrate Can you drive this one?
Yep, yep.
All right. So to kind of demonstrate this shift from moving a whole huge percentage of students from high risk to low risk, this is kind of the demonstration I've given our principals and instructional coaches that I think has helped explain this. If we look at, can I stand up?
Yeah.
And like point at things?
Yes, you want.
Teacher, yours.
Well, okay.
And I'll go
There's-
to both sides.
There's one thing, the microphone.
The mic.
Yeah, the mic.
All right.
So it's not our rule. We haven't got the wireless mics,
I'll point from here.
but,
I've got this.
All
So if we look at this kind of like a number line, we have students far to the left in red that have the lowest scores, and we have the students that are scoring the highest scores all the way to the right in college pathway. If we look at that as a number line and we say we have a student that's in high risk and they're at the bottom of high risk, and they make the 50th percentile, meaning they're making 1 year's growth. So that line is demonstrating 1 year's growth, the number of points, right? At the end of that year, the student is still where? High risk. So let's say the following year, we make typical growth again. Now the student is where? Some risk. So that teacher that wrote a goal about getting 80% of those kids into low risk is probably banging her head against the wall because she probably worked really, really hard and may not be there yet. So now another teacher gets them for another year and makes another year of typical growth. And the student is where still? Risk.
Some risk.
Some risk. Now let's take that same student. And if that student makes the 75th, oh, did I do that?
You clicked it. It's okay.
Oh, we're good.
Just leave it. Yep.
So let's go. So let's take that same student and let's do the 75th percentile or a year and a half's growth, aggressive growth.
Just gonna put
Yep.
this down.
Yep. So this student is making a year and a half's growth. And at the end of that year, they're where? They're still in high risk. But look at, if you think about the work it takes for the student and the work it takes for the other educators working and pouring into this child, it's really heart and soul killing to go, but they're still not in low risk. So let's do another year. And that kid gets really good targeted instruction and gets everything they need and poured into them. And at the end of that second year, they're where?
Some risk.
They're in some risk. In order to close gaps, our students that are that far behind the benchmark have to make aggressive growth.
Mhm.
And even then, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to get into low risk. So now at the end of year 3, we finally have a student who's caught up and is in low risk, or yes, in low risk. So in order to target those students who have the most to catch up, we have to make aggressive growth. We have to give them that targeted instruction that focuses on those skills that they need in order to get them there. And it can take a lot of time, which is why we shifted our goal in our theory of action to focus on growth as opposed to just moving kids to benchmarks, because we have to make sure we're writing goals that are smart, rigorous, but attainable.
And I just want to emphasize, Corey's talking about targeted instruction. So we need to first guarantee that every student is having access to grade level instruction every day. And then we need to target specific skills that they're lagging in. And the combination of those things is what's going to lead to aggressive growth. So it's not saying that we're going to just focus on what they need or lagging skills only. We're going to ensure that they get every day, they get access to their grade level content and standards. And as we know, some students thrive on in certain areas or with different standards. And then we target instruction beyond there. So let's look at an example of a student. We just did this in a different form, right? With who's starting in high risk. And then we have an example of a student who's starting in college pathway.
So if we look at this example of a student, this particular student, it would be in high risk with a 354 in reading in the fall of kindergarten. If that student makes aggressive growth, then in spring of their kindergarten year, they're at 420 and there's some risk. If that student makes aggressive growth again the following year, in second grade, they get to a 468 and there's some risk. If that student makes aggressive growth again, then in the spring of their second grade, they're finally in low risk. This is really to illustrate that that same student only making typical, modest, or flat growth doesn't catch up. They don't catch up. They continue to be in high risk, which is why it's so important to understand that we have to move our kids more than 1 year. Now, on the flip side of that, as we, I was on this one.
I'm not touching anything.
There we go. If we have a student in this particular case, we're looking at a fifth grader. So as college pathway in the fall of their fifth grade year, 545, their college pathway. If in the spring of their fifth grade year, they make aggressive growth, they stay college pathway. It means they're maintaining that higher level above the benchmark. If they continue to make aggressive growth, they stay at college pathway. And again, the spring of seventh grade, they continue to make that aggressive growth, meaning they're also getting targeted instruction to meet their needs where their instructional level is. That's how they stay at college pathway. If we look at that same student starting in fifth grade with a 545 and they make typical growth, meaning they're making 1 year's growth every single year, they also stay at college pathway at that higher level of attainment as they move through the grades. The problem is if we move below typical and we get into modest or flat growth, they do not maintain. And they fall out of college pathway. And if we were to follow this graph all the way across, we would see that they actually end up in some risk and in some cases high risk. So it's important to understand that this isn't a goal to focus on only our students that have gaps to close, but it's to make sure that we are giving equitable instruction to all of our students based on all of their instructional levels. So this is why it brings us to our theory of action and the goal that we wrote, which is all students who scored in low risk or college pathway on the FastBridge reading and math screeners in the fall of the 2024 school year would make typical growth in the spring 2025. And all students who scored in the some risk and high risk on the fall 2024 screener would make aggressive. That is the only way to maintain their levels, or in the case of our lower students right now, to get them to catch up. That's why we shifted the way that we were writing our goals. And that's why we've done a lot of work over the last 8 weeks or longer to really understand this particular concept and the way that FastBridge is giving us this data. So when we write our goals, we really know how to analyze each piece of it.
I will also add, again, our school's theories of action reflect this goal around growth. And then our teachers just completed writing their SLOs. So their learning objectives for themselves around student data focused on this area of growth. So we are also seeing like alignment across the system that we haven't seen before, and hopefully will translate into teachers and principals really understanding like what scores mean and what the also feeling proud of the work that both they have put in and the student has put in. Maybe they didn't move out of high risk, but they had aggressive growth, so they moved more than 1.5 years. And as a former teacher of multilingual students and often newcomers from other countries, it's important to honor that progress to ensure that like we're also not feeling really defeated at the end of the day with our data and knowing exactly where students are and what they need. So our baseline data, if you want to go to the next slide, Corey, and then we'll pause here before we go into these, the screener data. Our baseline data, if we look at in the areas of reading, 46% of the students who were in the 2 categories of high risk or some risk made aggressive growth last year. So our goal is that 100% of students are making aggressive growth. So we're starting at 46%. We would love to see 100%, but this is likely a multi-year goal that we have for our district. In the terms of the two upper categories, low risk and college pathway, 51% of students who were in those two categories last year made either typical or aggressive growth. And so again, we want at minimum them to be making typical growth to maintain at least a year's worth of growth. Or aggressive. So again, those are kind of our starting points with reading. And then you'll see in math, there is a difference and a dip. So 26% of students who are in high risk or some risk in the fall made aggressive growth in the spring last year. That's clearly not enough, and that we'll be talking about different things and we're putting into place to support students' growth in the area of math. And then, but on the flip of that, you'll see 64% of students who were low risk or college pathway last year in the fall made typical or aggressive growth. So students who are on or above grade level are continuing, 64% of them are continuing to make that level of growth. So I think it's important that all of us are clear in kind of where we're starting. And that this will be a multi-year focus for us. But if we want to pause here and see if there's any questions around the assessment itself or anything that any of us have shared, and then we will share a few more pieces of data that you have in front of you.
Just refresh my memory was, oh, I'm so sorry.
Ms. Carr had raised her hand.
Yes.
I was gonna allow her to go first.
Yes, Jane. Ms. Carr, go ahead.
Okay. All right, so, one of the things that always concerned me when we were using these types of tests, we did maps back when I was, what do you do when the student scores in the fall and then you're teaching and teaching and teaching, and then the score goes down in the winter or in the spring? I feel like, according to this, we're looking for that to go up. And they may well have learned, and that score goes down. How are you addressing that? Like, what are we doing as a district for that?
Yeah, so one of the things I openly talk to when I work with teachers or if I work with coaches or principals is that is a thing that happens. That for whatever reason on that day, the student, we didn't just lose knowledge.
Right.
Or the ability to do something. So remember, this is 1 point. And it's meant to have us, we're able to write goals and inform our instruction.
Right.
And we know that we gave instruction, and we know that one test is one piece of information about a child that has so many other things going on for them, around them, to them, with them. So it's important to understand that while it's a good piece of data that gives us information, just like taking a blood pressure or whatever, sometimes the weight goes up when we wanted it to go down, or it goes down, we wanted it to go up. So it's important to understand how to look at the other formative assessments that we're giving in the classroom and what our instruction looks like, and use that information as well to really draw the whole picture about any student.
I also just add this, I think it's important that we increase the rigor in our classrooms. I think if you have a kid who's already scoring high, and to keep that kid up at that particular level, we need to make sure that we're going a little deeper with instruction and further. I think we can often get stale and focus on the kids who are not there, and those kids are forgotten about. That's kind of one of the things that we talk about in a future slide that's coming up. Some strategies, especially with our GT population with depth and complexity. You heard the teacher talk about it tonight. It is a focus that we're using to make sure that we are including all kids into it. And this is these are strategies that everybody can use. It's not just for your GT population, but it definitely allows for them to kind of explore a little bit more in depth.
Yeah. I've even been using it when I do trainings or PD with our leaders. And it's been a really good strategy to model and also get them thinking in different ways through a different context or lens.
I'll add, I know it's a little difficult to see on here. This is some of the work that our district leadership team has been working on, exactly to what you're speaking about, Ms. Carr, which is how are we progress monitoring between this window that closed the end of September and January to know like where are we seeing progress with students, and we're not guessing or hoping for a change in the score. And so there's a reason this left column, it says progress monitoring for all students is kind of highlighted. And that again speaks to like, what are we doing for explicit grade level instruction? And then how are all of our teachers able to progress monitor towards the skills that they need to work on with students that maybe are lagging currently, but will support them in meeting grade level expectations. And so I think progress monitoring is going to be a continued emphasis throughout this year. And it's already on the docket to bring to our leadership and have continued conversation over the next like 3 months. Because as we go deeper with data, we also find where we have areas of growth as an organization, and we have to build capacity. This information can't live within just Corey or within just a principal. It has to be like everyone needs to feel competent and confident in what they're doing. So I think progress monitoring is a big part of that as well.
All right, so when you've really talked about the support that you're giving the leaders in the building and the teachers in the building. As one of our deeper learning competencies, we know that kids need to be involved. How are we involving kids in FastBridge data?
Yeah, one of the tools that we rolled out with our leadership team this year was a goal setting sheet that the teacher would sit and do side by side with a student. So there is a score guide that FastBridge provides that says if student scoring in this range has these skills that are in their instructional level, and then here are strategies that a teacher can use. So as I presented it to our coaches and our principals to kind of roll this out, we have the form that they'd be able to put what that score is, sit with a student and talk. These are kind of the skills that we'd want to work on. What do we think we want to work on in the next 2 weeks to really have some ownership for the student in their goal setting? So we're trying to not only understand the kind of goals we need to be setting overall as a teacher in a classroom, but then how do we sit side by side and confer with a student to make it meaningful to them? Because I can show you a whole bunch of scale scores, but if I haven't made that connect to skills that aligns to, it doesn't mean anything to a teacher. And if I haven't talked about what the student needs to be doing, it doesn't have any meaning for them either. So we're kind of building that out, but that's another slide as we move on.
Yep. Yeah, goal setting has been another area of focus. And again, we're trying to not overwhelm the system. We're trying to build capacity, which means also for our students to not say, here are 15 skills you need to work on. It's like, let's talk through what I as a teacher think. I think maybe we could start here. What do you already know about blank? And like get them familiar so that they can also feel proud of the progress that they are making towards those goals. I just want to highlight, we could keep going with questions. We do have more data to show. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're not quite done yet with the data as well. So, but if we want to keep going, Noah, with any questions, then we can keep going.
Non-data related questions is a little bit more right now.
Just refresh me. Are we gonna need to start a new math curriculum, correct?
This last year, so we're in year 2 implementation
Right,
with
so I mean,
K-5 math.
not to excuse numbers, but there's almost always a difference with the new implementation because teachers haven't learned how to work the system yet and use all the resources available to it.
Yep.
So I just wanted to double check on.
Thank you for that. Yep.
I asked the same question.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've prepared the team for this presentation because I actually role played. I played Miss Carr and I role played Miss Kaiser. Mr. Burns hasn't come up yet. I'm hoping. No, in all seriousness, these are the types of questions that I've been asking as well, just to try to make it make sense.
Yeah.
Because I think we all are expecting it to increase, right? You're in a classroom and you're receiving instruction, progress monitoring. scores should go up. And so that's been one of the questions. Well, we have this new curriculum, why aren't we seeing it? But as you stated, in the first year, that's usually a dip to get adjusted to the curriculum. So I've asked the same question.
Mr. Burns?
Could you remind me when they were saying risk, what are we defining? Because like, as we're talking about this and as a, someone who maybe doesn't have kids in the district, they look at this and they're like, what's high risk? What does that mean?
So high risk is in response okay. Here we go. So when we talk about benchmarks, what FastBridge says is high risk means they are far below the grade level benchmark.
Right, but at risk for what?
At risk of not having academic success. So falling behind, not scoring on statewide assessments, not having mastery of the grade level skills and standards.
Okay. So then if it's not having mastery of grade level pieces, why is our end piece college pathway? Because shouldn't that be graduation pathway if our end all be all for being at grade level would be that they graduate?
So this is the language from FastBridge. This is their terminology that we're using because the reports that we get are aligned to that language. I would agree with you.
Can we argue with them to get rid of that?
I love arguing with them, so I will gladly argue with them.
Well, and I say this because we've done a lot of work to encourage the technical pathways and the other pathways that we have. And so college is not the end pathway. The end pathway is being career ready, of being graduation ready. So like right now, I'm on a low risk pathway. What does that mean? Does that mean that I'm not going to get hired doing a welding job? Because I'm pretty sure if I can weld, I'll get hired.
Right.
So, and I don't necessarily need to read well. I don't necessarily need to do math well. But if I can make a weld well, I'm going to make more than most of the people that can read or write well. So, I mean, I think that we need to really, while we're reporting all this information, kind of coming at it from just, and I apologize that I didn't talk about this earlier when I saw it, but I was trying to put myself in hearing this as a parent. And so if you come into a meeting with a teacher and they say, well, your kid's at low risk, you're already starting off on a negative pathway. Like, oh my God, risk of what? Are they okay? What's going on? So like, I really think that if we can argue with them and it's fine how we have our setups and we have our percentiles, and that's great, but risk for what? Right? It's, academic success for someone who becomes, a mechanic. Is that important? They're still going to be successful, but are they necessarily at math and reading levels? Right? So low risk, high risk, all those risks. What does that mean for one? But also two, if we can change I know how we get it, and I think the percentiles are fine, but if we can argue with them to change the verbiage, I think that would be important because we don't necessarily want to start on this negative piece, and we don't necessarily want to continue that push that college is the best thing that you're going to get to, because it's not. So like, at some risks, so I can't go into the military. Like it's, where does that land? And so I think that too, and even while we're talking about this, and I think I let myself fall into it when we were talking before, it's like, oh yeah, it looks great, low risk, college, right? Okay, but we always forget then the rest of the population that is the bigger part of the population that is not going to college and they're doing other things.
Yeah. That's
So
fantastic.
to me, this is a verbiage problem.
You said non.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that. I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is, we don't have to argue with FastBridge. When we talk about it, we just use different verbiage.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, in the conferencing that teachers have with students, they may be showing a report, but they're gonna be focusing on, here are the skills that we're really focusing on with your student, and what they need. So, but I think it's a valuable thing to also just bring back and remind and reiterate with our full leadership team and with teachers, because it's all deficit language, coming from, and that's pretty common, with any of these like state and screener assessments. And so I think it's a valuable point to just remind us when we're communicating with families, what we are communicating. And what are we doing really ultimately to support and partner with them on what their students need. Because it's important, all of us can grow. It doesn't matter what category you're in. It's like, hey, this is what your student is, but this is what I'm gonna be working on with them to support their growth.
No, it's a good suggestion, and honestly, I kid, but Fastbridge is fairly responsive. They will set meetings with me and I can share that feedback, no problem.
And arguing with them or not, I just think that if we can start from rather than a deficit language to our progressive language, because we are trying to have a
Yep.
growth mindset here, right? That's what we're trying to measure with
Yeah.
our pieces. So then our language should reflect a growth
Mhm.
trajectory.
Yep.
I think that's all I got.
Okay. Ms. Steele?
Debating if I wanna.
Do it.
Which, no. Well, I personally, I mean, they're college ready. We want all of our kids, even though whether they go to college or not, I would still think you'd want them. I think that's the way I view it as, is more like college pathway. I see it as college ready, meaning if they wanted to pursue education beyond that, they could. But here's my question. So I see all of this stuff like, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna bring people up, we're gonna take an aggressive stance. How are we addressing this if we have that kiddo who only shows up 3 days a week? Or they're having issues at home? Because a lot of this is inside, if you look at it from like the most like, if you look at it optimistically, everyone's gonna come in the classroom and we're gonna work on this and we're gonna work on this. And we know that that's not how it happens. So how are we addressing this in terms of like, I see that. I want us to get those kids who are in the high risk up, but how are we doing that if we have a kiddo that there's other barriers within their school, within their academics?
Yeah.
Whether it's home.
I would just say, again, this is our focus today for the workshop was screener data around current instructional levels for students. So when we isolate the workshop, like we kind of have, we aren't talking about, okay, all the efforts we're doing around attendance, a rollout of second step across K-5 to support social emotional learning in the schools. We're not talking about conferencing with families or conferring. So great point. I think that's just not where we were going with our baseline data today around the screener. But of course, all of that is encompassed beyond like within the school day, right? So this is not in isolation and this is not the only assessment we do, right? This is just our screener assessment for the fall. But then we also have, remind me of the change for the SEL assessment that we'll be doing in the winter.
Yeah, so Fastbridge offers an SEL assessment within the suite that we already pay for. So we are making the shift from Panorama to Sabres, which is built into Fastbridge. So it saves a little, which I always like. And it's, the verbiage is a little bit more student friendly and it's a little bit shorter, but it gives us some behavior, pinpointed skills and behavior as well. And then ideas for where that student is with those skills.
And these are just some of the assessments, not to incorporate, like we have unit assessments within our curriculum that we're using to be able to collaborate across teams and across schools, et cetera. So great point, Ms. Steele. It's just not the necessarily the focus of our time today.
Okay, one more question, and then we're gonna go to the data. Ms. Lee?
I was just kind of picking back on Mr. Burns, Ms. Steele, and Mr. Lee's with the, like the verbiage and stuff too, is just, I guess, having had one that just graduated and literally went from, I don't know if I want to go to school for 8 more years to be a vet, or if I want to go into the trades. He had kind of made that decision for trades, and then any testing was just, I don't care, I'm not worried about it. So I think it's important that we not just let the parents know what this is all about, but the students too, and how important it still is to put forth the effort in the tests. Because like I say, just for my own household, I know, like, I can look at half of my kids and go, yep, they'll put it all in, because I, at least at this point, they're still driven for that, after school college. But then the 2 that didn't, they kind of were like, oh, it doesn't matter, but it does, and for them to realize that your mind, you can change your mind, you can this or that, that it's still important to put this in and that it's not just for college, but I mean, just as a functioning adult in society too, whether you're gonna go to college or into the trades, it's still important. So I think just to make sure that we also convey that to the students just as much as the parents. Cause I know sometimes with my kids, it's not hearing it from me that matters, but from other people, you know, that they get that same message too, to still take it seriously.
Yep. I think that's a great point. So Corey, I'm gonna shift into, I'll project this. So if everyone wants to flip. On the front, there is a key just for knowledge that what you see on the next few pages. If you see green, that means there's gonna be an increase. Blue means it is the same or no change. And then red will be a decrease. And so we'll look at some other data sets before we close out with our like leadership next steps. You can go ahead, Corey.
So the first page in the data, well, it'd be your second page because there was a title page. That first page is looking at in the area of reading. So using our A reading data, it is giving the percentage of students in low risk and college pathway, which is what we would consider on risk or above that grade level benchmark for last fall. And then what that percentage is for low risk and college pathway this fall. This is not looking at student cohorts. This is looking at the first line is the district as a whole, and then just looking at each school individually underneath that. As you can see in the area of reading, we had four schools stay the same. We had 6 that increased, and we had 5 that decreased.
Again, different groups of students, right? So not following a cohort, saying these are all of our kiddos in these groups.
If you look at the next page, this is where I followed cohorts of students. So we're gonna take it one step at a time. If you look at that top line, there's like 3 black boxes and then a box that says 43. So this is our group of our current kindergartners that took a test this fall. 43% of those students coming in off the bat, some of them may have had 4K, some of them had daycare, some of them were just at home or with other caregivers and their families. But 43% of those kindergartners coming in are in what Fastbridge considers those low risk or college pathway categories. If we follow that down, there's 2 black boxes and then 2 numbers of screens. These are our current first graders. So this was 44% last year in fall when they were kindergartners, came in low risk and college pathway. And now in first grade, 36% of them are low risk and college pathway. And this follows all the way down. So this is looking at specific cohorts of students. So in the far right column, this is how the students in that particular grade level tested this fall. And then the column ahead of that is how that same group tested in the fall of last year. And then if you follow back further to the left, you can see as we have grade levels that obviously have been here more than 2 years. And this is again in the area of reading. If we go to the next page, we switch gears to math. In the area of math, we had 2 schools stay the same, 8 that increased, and 5 that decreased. The percentage of students in those low risk and college pathway ranks or benchmark areas.
You'll notice that the 5 that decreased, oh, I apologize, I didn't move it up here. The 5 that decreased are all elementaries. So speaking to a new adoption last year for K-5 math. But there have been increases across our secondary.
And for high school, that's only 9th and 10th grade, correct?
Correct. Only 9th and 10th.
Yes. Then if we go all the way down to the final page in this data that I prepared, we have a very similar looking graph to the reading one. This is just following those same cohorts, but how they've performed in the area of math. So again, on the far right, you have our current students in any given grade. And then if you follow back to the left, it's how they performed last fall, and then the fall before that, and the fall before that.
First grade says 60% and then 50, but is it no
Yeah,
change?
that's an error.
Okay,
I was gonna say.
I just caught it. That's
Okay,
an error.
yeah.
So
alright.
that's on me. Should be red, the first grade cohort, which you're also seeing trends between reading and math in certain cohorts.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
mhm.
That's good.
Yes, that's district wide. So now, the last thing we'll share and then open up discussion, questions, any and everything. Is just around our next steps and how we've spent time analyzing this data over the past 2 weeks. We've analyzed it with our leadership team, including principals, APs, deans, coaches. And a few things that we are doing intentionally moving forward. The first is we are continuing with instructional rounds. Last week we had 4, 2 high schools and 2 intermediate schools. During instructional rounds, we are using a coaching frame that all of our instructional coaches or deeper learning coaches are using. We're getting our principals really comfortable with using that, which is validate, clarify, stretch, and apply feedback. So we're getting better as a system of like how we give feedback and how we give focused feedback. So the feedback we are offering to our leadership teams is focused on their theory of action and their look fors with their staff. The second is continuous improvement work. You've heard us use the term SAIL. I presented on that a few weeks ago. We are coming up on the end of our first 100-day plans, and we are starting our second 100 days in November. We'll have a full day with all SAIL teams on Friday, November 1st. So while kiddos are not in school, we will be here all day, reflecting again on this data, including other data sets to Ms. Steele's point earlier, and then informing what are we doing in our next 100 days. And also the instructional rounds will all be complete by then. So that's like another intentional move of we've all like, we're not just talking about it, we're seeing it in action, and principals are and coaches are in classrooms daily. So they have feedback for their next 100-day plans. We are also, as I mentioned earlier, doing goal setting with teachers and students. So with teachers, it's having their specific goals aligned to the school goals. Previously, that wasn't happening. So they were setting goals on different areas, but then then your ship is being pulled in all different directions and we're not actually going in the same, rowing in the same direction. So teachers' goals are aligned, and then also conferencing and having one-on-ones with students, like here's where you're at. These are some skills we're going to work on, and picking like 1 to 2. And you're going to progress monitor that skill as a teacher in a small group, so that once they've mastered or they've accomplished that one, they can move on to a new skill. So we're not also spending time on skills that students already know. And that's something we hear from students in elementary through high school. I've talked to kids doing instructional rounds and they'll say, I feel like I've done this before already, right? So we need to make sure that they're having new opportunities in their learning as well. Emphasis on progress monitoring with leaders, teachers, and students moving forward. That will be the emphasis in November, so in a couple short weeks. And then intentional math next steps. So we know that there is room for growth across our system, across reading and math skills, but in particular we have like a strong plan around literacy, and we're making changes both with early literacy and also our use of core resource at 612 for English or literacy development. But for math, right, we're in our 2nd year implementation for elementary. A fabulous member of the leadership and learning team, Keith Ruffalo, was here a few weeks ago. He has developed in collaboration with Houghton Mifflin, HMH, a 2nd year implementation plan for elementary. They just did walks last week. That's something that Courtney, Ms. Vang highlighted at Hoover. Amanda Hendrickson is our math lead for K-5. So there's a full plan on how we can support and ensure that that resource is being used really strategically at the elementary level. And then earlier this evening, I was at our first formal 612 math committee meeting for a new core resource that's up in our adoption cycle. And so while our current resource is being used across 612, it definitely varies and there is not coherence like we would like to see at this point. And so our teachers that are part of that committee are really excited to both review our current resource and look at options for piloting this winter. So those are some of our next steps. Dr. Robinson, would you like to add
Yeah, I
anything?
was just gonna add that there's a lot of common planning as well across schools.
Mhm.
And so if you're visiting West Milwaukee, and then as we did, went to FLW later on that day, you would see where there's common planning, where there's sharing of materials, and there's an alignment across the board. So we're definitely as a system improving those things. And that's through the work of Chris and Keith that Alyssa mentioned earlier. It's just trying to make sure that we are providing the coaching that's needed across the board. And you're definitely seeing that. That also includes common assessment building across buildings. So that's something that we're on to.
Mhm. Okay. Discussion, questions? Anything else from the board?
Additional questions for the board? This can be related to data.
Anything? Yes.
Looking forward to spring.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you for your time, your effort, and for sharing everything.
It's a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
So I just one thing I want to bring up really quick is that while this is absolutely true that students, like when they get this test, they can absolutely represent where they're at placement wise. I think it's also really important for everybody here to understand the high school mindset. And that is, Cedric, that not everyone is going to try their hardest in this test. For most kids, this test is something that's going to be randomly handed out. It's not worth anything. So even if they get everything, they do the best they possibly can, or whether they do horrible, nothing's going to be changed or worked for that. And I think it's really important to understand, because while this may be, it very well is a great representation of the data in our school system, it's also not taking into account that some students are not always necessarily trying to the fullest extent. So that's just something to think about.
I just want to say, I think you bring up a great point, because we were having some recent discussions about 11th and 12th graders taking the assessment. And that was kind of my thinking as well, is that those students are kind of 1 foot out the door, basically. And what kind of data would it give us? And so that's why we kind of stuck to 9th and 10th grade, just kind of thinking, well, I agree with you 100%.
Kind of on top of that too, I think you have a segment of the population, which I wasn't that familiar with until a few years ago when it impacted my family, that just have test anxiety and just don't perform well on a test, no matter what it is, no matter how much they're prepared for it, no matter how much they know the material. So that's a piece of it to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I feel like we've had this discussion before, like as far as student feedback, but do we have something that's reliable where we can ask students that exact question? Like, do you find this useful? Is it relevant? Do you care? How hard do you try? Do we do something like that? And if not, should we be doing something like that?
Yeah.
Goal setting for them, I mean.
Yeah, when you, so I think you're talking about on the front end though.
Or, I mean,
Yeah.
either way, as long as we're understanding, like before, when we're looking at this day, we can say, okay, well, we can take it with how big a grain of salt do we need for this?
I think to answer your question, no, I don't think we've done anything formal in that manner. But assessments like this really give you some type of indication for the common assessments that's given by state. There's an alignment there. No matter, I think Mrs. Carr mentioned MAP earlier, right? MAP, Renaissance, Fast Bridge. I feel like I'm missing another one that's out there. Star, yeah. All of these assessments, they're research based and they're supposed to be aligned to your state exam. That's why districts use these particular formats to track growth. To answer your question, no, we have not, had a conversation to see if the kids find them beneficial. I don't know if a kid would say they like to test. So it's also kind of, what would you get out of it? But I totally understand where you're coming from. But I think the familiarity with these tests are becoming more evident. Kids are recognizing, yeah, things are going home. We're having discussions with parents about these things. So that's occurring more where, there's a, this is not a stranger type of format. They're familiar with it. So that's helping the situation.
I also think goal setting being another area that we could do better, because while the number previously, I wouldn't say confidently that all of our staff would know what the number represents, what skills they should work on with that student. And it's due to us needing to build capacity and provide that learning for leaders, teachers, etc. So I think with that, it's more of like, if I'm Alyssa's a ninth grader, like my teacher sits with me and is like, hey, like you've been doing really well in this area. I think this is actually where I think you would next like need to grow in your writing or in your math. That would be helpful because that's focused feedback. As a form, we were all students, and I remember not getting a lot of feedback. I always did well. So overall, I was like, Alyssa's fine. Alyssa's great, and that's not the story for a lot of students. They're always doing not well. And then they're getting, like vague feedback, but it's like, it's really helping students understand what are the skills that, and then knowing John's really into this is his pathway. So if he's going into welding, like maybe I am focused more on some of these math concepts versus like literacy, or what within literacy can I relate to John? So I think those are areas where we can make it somewhat meaningful. And at the end of the day, it's one data point. That's why we also do, we're doing practice tests with ACT. Previously, we've only done one. Again, I know mixed feelings in the room and in the world around ACT, but it allows students to also not come to those assessments that maybe they do make a decision in the 11th hour of their 12th grade year. And they're like, I actually want to be a vet. And like, they at least have options available to them. And that's a big driver for me in this work, is that students have every option that available to them. And so our job is to prepare them so that they feel confident in their skills in reading and math that do translate.
So one of the things I started with is talking about being data efficient. And I think as a leadership team, from the principals level, when you come to leadership and you sit and watch our principals engage with DOCs and they're pulling out charts, they're looking at it and talking about kids, it's going in that direction. But what the work that we still have to do though, is we have to create an environment where our students are able to control and take control and talk about their own data. When you have students who can tell you where they are and what they're working on, that's impactful. And that's when they're taking control, and that's when the stuff is going to start shooting up. And we're not there because we're still trying to build systems around that to make it an environment where that happens. But where they're not looking at this, this is another assessment. No. This is a measurement of your progress, not a test. The test sounds so bad. So just really trying to make it to where it's beneficial and they understand how beneficial it is for their success.
Brendan?
Yeah, so kind of on that piece, I think we've talked about FastBridge a few times. And I think some of the pieces that I'm hearing though is that we want more. And so where are we with getting the extras? So like the things that the kids can then engage upon and make this part of the snapshot rather than the snapshot itself. Like, how much are you working? Are you taking care of siblings? Are you taking care of an ailing person? Are you in an apprenticeship? Are you doing things so that you can see, all right, well, they're spending 40 hours a week doing this. They're not really going to do well on this test necessarily because their focus is somewhere else. Like, where are we on building that structure so that we can get a little bit more from this?
It's that PGP work then, and it's that graduation plan. And so trying to define what a graduate from our district looks like. That's the work that we're going to, as I mentioned to talk to Mr. Lee about following, I think it was our one of our August meetings, that's going to be the work that we're going to be doing, looking at in December, once this period of embargo ends, and we can start looking at our real data. is try, how do we define that? And a graduate is defined starting, and I said this before, fifth grade. Like we have in fifth grade, kids should know where their pathway is. And then we're remeasuring in the eighth grade. And then when they get to high school, they should already have a direction they're going in. So it's okay if they want to go to a trade. That's okay. But we have to create pathways for students and expose them to these different ideas and things that they can do. Because again, college is not for everybody, and that's okay. That is okay. Like I go get a haircut once a week. I'm going bald, and so I can't make it 2 weeks. But my barber, I know he's talented. You know, they're talented people in every profession. Plumbers make a lot of money, right? I know that because I have to pay them when they. They make a lot of money. There are skills, but we have to work as a district to help identify what that pathway is. That's the work that we're going to start in December with.
It's something else.
Yeah, just one last thing against verbiage. It's hard to set goals for low risk or some risk. It feels defeating already for a goal. Just as you're going and talking.
No, I think for this particular presentation, it was needed for me to try to figure out, because I asked this question, like, are we using the same language as FastBridge? Because that's the way I could understand, but I think community facing, we could use some different terms, so I agree with you. But again, I'm trying to understand, I've asked them a number of times, I need you to get on the phone with FastBridge. So I need to understand what I think it's important. I'm not joking when I say I role played, and I played at least 3 of you guys, okay? Because I felt like that there are questions that I wanted to make sure that we provide not only answers. I'm sorry, we provide not only to you but to the public, and that's why I tried to play devil's advocate and say, okay, so what would Mr. Burns say right here? What would Ms. Clark say right here?
Earn my place.
No, you're earning. You're earning, and I think though. Seriously, there may have been a couple of questions we're not prepared for, but that's why we were prepared for some of these questions, because I was trying to role play last week with this. So just make sure we have the information.
No, and I appreciate it. I was just being cheeky, but
I got you. No, but it makes a lot of sense.
So I wanted to go back to what John said, because I think if we're using this data as a means to try and make decisions about how we're having interventions with students, if the data is flawed that we're using, then those interventions are not going to have the desired effect, right? Because if the kid doesn't care what they get out the test, doesn't matter how many interventions you put in, they're like, I don't care about this test. I already know that. So are there things that this is a screener. I understand the point of it. But if we're using this data for making next steps, and the kid never cares what the data says, then that data is useless for that kid. And so there's probably no good way to know how many of those kids fall into that category. So are there carrots that we as a district can use to try and encourage students to perform to the best of their ability when they know that there's no negative outcome if they don't?
Yeah, so when I talk to teachers about this being one point of data, we know that there's a lot of other things a teacher can use to understand where a student is. It is one place that we start. And we know that there are times where a student didn't do so hot. We know that a student just didn't care. The student didn't feel that relevance to where they are and who they are in that moment. So there is always room. I always talk about there's the science of teaching, which is I did this assessment, I look at it, I go, okay, this score equates to this skill, and that's what I'm going to start with. But there's the art of teaching. When I look at that, I know that a student, he's already mastered that skill. So I'm going to sit down and have a discussion with him about either what happened when he took the test, or I'm just going to skip to it and have that conversation that's meaningful with that student about, hey, I know that you need to work on this, this, and this. So why don't we set your goal on these skills? Because it's twofold in the world of education. There is this sciencey part, which I really like. That's why I'm here.
But there's the art part that comes into knowing your kids, understanding that they are whole people, not just a number, and being able to look at their other formative assessments and other instructional plans and know where that student fell short, where they showed that they were accelerated, and knowing where to go with that and set goals that make sense for that. So while we can never have one piece of data that is valid in that way in every single way, this gives us that starting point, but then a teacher does what they are trained to do to move forward with that student. And hopefully the student sees that relevance, or this teacher has that conversation, so that the next time they take that assessment in the winter, the student sees, oh, now I can use that to set that next goal. And then there are other teachers that do incentivize meeting goals. I mean, I was in the classroom when we were still using MAP, and I had, if so many percentage of us meets our goal, we're going to have a hot dog party, we're going to have ice cream, whatever. And the students that were going to buy in, and the students that were struggling for whatever reason, didn't. But then it's our job as the educators in that setting to work with those kids to figure out how to make it relevant to them and what it is that's going to get them to bite in.
So I guess I see your hand, Jane, so I will call on you in just a second.
Oh.
Where I'm struggling with is we're moving into community facing, right? So we're looking at the data and say, look, here's all of the grades where they went down. But if the information isn't as telling as that, if that isn't really the story, then I can see the confusion that can come from that when we're trying to say, well, this based on FastBridge, this is where we're at, but it's not really a total. And I always say no test is a total view of what's happening with any one student, but we're focusing on this, and so that's why I'm going to pick at it. So having incentives is great, but I think like for me, just hearing things and knowing how students are, since I have two of them, I think that the elementary data might be more meaningful because those students might be more like they just, I just take this test, and so I do the best I can. And there's less like, oh, do I really need to do this? There's less of that in those grades versus at the high school level, or maybe in the intermediate level as well, because there's more of that independent thought that's happening. And so to me, I look at this and say, okay, well, I think the elementary data is more meaningful and the secondary data is less meaningful when it comes to FastBridge, because those students don't really understand it doesn't really matter if I do well or not, versus I just try the best that I can. And then those other things that might be going on in those students' life are playing a role. I'm hungry, I didn't sleep well last night, whatever. And that's playing a role in an elementary level, versus secondary might be that, or I just don't care. And it's hard to get that buy-in. For me, data is only meaningful if you have that, like, this is really what's going on. And I understand this is only one point, but how do we get all the points? And when we put this community facing, that brings concerns to the forefront, because then this will get pointed to, we'll see, you're failing. You're not doing well. And so, but I would go back and say, well, this isn't a representation of everything that's going on. It's 1 point, but that doesn't matter, right? That's what school report cards. That's what the majority of what we're being evaluated on is 1 point in time in which someone is evaluated on what they know. And so for me, when it comes to this, it's like, well, how much time and effort do we want to put into this data if we don't really know that the data is actually telling us what we want to know? Individually, from a teacher perspective, okay, if you know that student, that's great, but how do you summarize it for the community?
I'm just going to elevate that tonight, while we did a whole workshop on FastBridge, our screener, we did look at other data points just this evening. So we looked at attendance rates, we looked at students that were taking advantage of early college credit program and Start College Now options. We have more students going into taking advanced courses in our tech universities than in our traditional four-year universities, which speaks to also things we're talking about. So I think there's always two things. One, I think that we need to have a baseline and something that we're pointing to show progress over time. And that is the purpose and intention, one of the purposes and intentions of a screener. So at least we can point to over years, these are the shifts we're seeing. And I don't want to dismiss what John said, because I do think that's true. But on the flip, I think there are a lot of high schoolers that do take tests seriously because it does really matter to them, to their family, to their teacher. Right, like their teacher might be hyping up, I really want to know what you know, et cetera. So, and it does give us a starting point of skills to work on with students, depending on where they score. And to what Corey said, yep, there's like the art of it, like maybe there are some students that didn't demonstrate as well, but that's also feedback to us as teachers, because sometimes, and we see this, sometimes they'll test really well on their teacher created assessment, but the skill doesn't translate to another assessment. So ultimately that skill isn't translating outside of the classroom. And really our work is for students to be able to translate their math skills, their literacy skills out into the world. So that could also be some feedback for us to pay attention to, of if students aren't doing well on something and they're like, well, in my classroom, you can do this, then maybe it's because I give you the same type of questions every time and you're really familiar with that, but you're not able to translate it. And I mean, math and literacy skills are applied across all of the work that all of us do in different organizations and things of that nature. So I'll just say I hear that. I think I hold two things at the same time. We have to have something that can show progress consistently over time. And we know in schools, this is a data point and teachers are aware of that. But I also think if we aren't putting this intentional work into FastBridge, our teachers wouldn't even, or our leaders really know what to do with the data. So then we're back at data rich. We have lots of data, but we're actually not using it to inform any changes that we're making. So, but to your point, Mr. Lee, we can use this to inform changes. We can use common assessments that we've been working on across 612 to inform changes, and those are all tied to grade level standards for different courses. We can use our Into Math core resource at K5. They have unit assessments, again, grounded in standards. So teachers are pulling from different places to inform their instruction, but we noticed that we were doing this test and it was almost meaningless if people don't know what to do with those scores or what skills they need to work on.
And so I want to back up and be clear. I think that it's being used in the classroom, but I'm more focusing on what the community perspective is of this data. I 100% believe that the teachers are using the data and doing as much as they can with it to try and address, and they know their students, and so they can make those decisions. But from a community member's perspective or a community-wide perspective, they don't have that. All they have is the numbers that we show them, right? And so that's what I was trying to focus on, is like, there are many other things that go into it, but this is one part of it. And there's a lot more to the story than this one part. And so that's the part that I wanted to just address and ensure that anyone who's listening to this, even though there's no one else here right now, but people go back and listen to the recordings.
Yeah.
That's the point. Like, you can't just take one thing and say, oh, this is evident of what's happening. It's more about, oh, there's a lot of other things behind the scenes. This is just one part of it. Please come back to another meeting or watch another one where we talk about those parts. So that's the thing that I was trying to focus on. Ms. Carr?
I just would say that I go back to the deeper learning competencies. And if we start in 4K through 12th grade on academic mindset, and for 12 years, those kids know that they belong, that they are valued, that all of the things that an academic mindset says, and we instill that in them, they will, hopefully by the time they get to high school, they will understand why we do those tests. And so I do think that it's really important to go back to those, because those are core things that we need to be instilling into our students. And I think that really helps for this particular situation.
Yeah, I think academic mindset and content mastery, like those are two that are really important that we can continue to remind students. Again, it's about their growth towards their goals.
Any closing remarks?
I'm just excited. I mean, similar to what this guys have said, like I'm excited to see where we are in winter and in spring. I feel like I'm really proud of the work of my team. I'm proud of the work of our principals who have like really stepped up their own instructional leadership in these areas, and the conversations they're having are beyond anything that I've heard previously. So I'm proud of the work we're doing, and I'm proud that it's really focused. So you won't see a laundry list of things we're working on, because then nothing will really get done, but we're trying to be really thoughtful and focused. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for presenting here tonight. We're looking forward to seeing those updates and an update in the future about where things are once the data points come in.
Yeah.
So with
Awesome.
that, we're gonna take a 5-minute recess. We have an executive session to get ready for. And what? Wait a minute. All right. All right, thank you so much, and we are in recess. All right, we're back from our short recess. So I now look for a motion in a second to convene an executive session to pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent F, for purpose of considering student disciplinary expulsion orders, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial negative effect upon student reputation and the students involved. You have to say the whole thing technically. So, okay, we had a motion in a second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're going to
You
executive
paused for a
session.
little second.